With some very few exceptions. Remakes often fall flat on their faces, don't they? But yeah, we do get some good ones, as long as they're remakes of other previous live-action films. When it comes to animation, that seems to be a different story. Certainly there have been some live-action remakes of animated films that have been box office hits, but in the long run from fans and critics and just audiences in general, they're met with derision, with many seeing them as unnecessary and often failing to understand what made the original so good. Well, the live-action One Piece does seem to be an exception. And I'm sad to say, Hollywood is going to continue that trend. But it has often been the case that when it comes to these live-action remakes of animated films, far more often than not, I'm not even a fan of the original. So while I can certainly sympathize with the fans of the original works, I can't quite feel their sense of outrage or disappointment. But I can certainly feel the disappointment this time. And that film in particular is the 2018 South Korean film Illang, directed by Kim Ji-woon and scripted by Kim Ji-woon and Jeon Cho-hung. I hope I pronounced that correctly. This film is a remake of the 1999 anime Jin-Roh, directed by Hiroyuki Okiura and written by Mamoru Oshii, based on his own Kerberos saga. Animated at Production IG. Now before I continue, I must say that this video will primarily be looking at Jin-Roh and Ilang. And while I will be taking a look at other installments in the Kerberos saga, ones available in English anyway, this video is not intended to be a deep dive into the Kerberos saga. The primary reason for this is that while Jin-Roh is set in the Kerberos saga, it's really an original story, as this was a specific request to Mamoru Oshii from director Hiroyuki Okiura. More on that a little later. I also have to add that I will not be discussing the political backgrounds of each film. Not because I don't find them interesting, but it's rather, what I have of the Kerberos saga in English, that is the 6 issues of Hellhound's Panzer Cops that was released by Dark Horse Comics, and the 3 movies, The Red Spectacles, Stray Dogs, and Jin-Roh, it doesn't give me enough of an understanding as to how it corresponds with Japanese history. It's a case where I get the general picture, but not the nuances, if that makes sense. So the real-life backgrounds of Jin-Roh and Ilang, I will just have to leave in more capable hands. Anyway, let's begin. The Kerberos saga takes place in an alternate 20th century. In this timeline, the United States stays out of both world wars due to its non-intervention policy, and in World War II, Japan ends up joining the Allies against the Axis powers. But here, Germany ends up defeating the Soviet Union thanks to the development of the Protect gear, and defeats Japan by dropping atomic bombs on them. However, while Germany was the victor, the assassination attempt on Hitler by Klaus von Stauffenberg was a success, whereas in real life it was a failure. This leads to a complete clearing of Nazism in Germany and the Weimar Republic being restored. Germany then occupied Japan and set it on a path towards reconstruction and to help it rejoin the world. However, the policies that were put in place to make the economy grow led to massive unemployment, and as slums began to grow in the cities, so did violent crime. Anti-government groups started sprouting up, start raising hell, and they proved to be too much for the local police. To avoid violating the new constitution, which places restrictions on the use of the self-defense forces, and to make sure that the local police doesn't become a national force, the government chose a third option. A new force was made under the National Public Safety Commission, with its activities limited to the capital. This new force was called the Capitol Police Organization. Donning the Protect gear and armed with heavy weaponry, they became the new guardians of public order. As anti-government forces faced bans and other legal troubles, they regrouped and formed an urban guerrilla group called the Sect. Soon, battles between the Sect and the Capitol Police grew more and more violent, enraging public opinion. As the public looks forward to the prosperity that was promised, the Sect becomes more and more unfavorable. And the special unit known as Kerberos, well, their existence is now being called into question.
その歴史的使命を終え、時代は彼らに新たな、そして最終的な役割を与えようとしていた。
As for Ilang, well, this movie was released in 2018, so the events that caused the main action of the story take place in the year 2024. Very futuristic, I know. Hell, in the film it states,
지금으로부터 6년 후 2024년.
Anyway, in 2024, the political order around the Korean peninsula has run into trouble, as territorial disputes with China, the main power in Asia, provokes Japan into remilitarizing, pulling in the United States and Russia, creating the possibility of a new war. This leads to reunification talks between North and South Korea. They agree to do so, with a 5-year interim declared to minimize repercussions, and to ease the transition. The United States, Japan, and Russia do not want this, and thus push against it. Korea then suffers severe economic repercussions, and reunification is no longer such a hot idea. This leads to lots of social unrest, and an anti-unification sentiment starts to spring up. More specifically, the anti-reunification group called the Sect. With the local police not able to handle the Sect, the president announces the creation of the Special Unit, which are essentially the Capitol Police, and even their emblem is Kerberos. or rather Cerberus, the three-headed hound that guards the underworld in Greek mythology. However, within a year of the special unit's creation, a sad incident known as Bloody Friday happens, in which 15 innocent schoolgirls were mowed down during an operation. The special unit members, ashamed of what happened, hid their faces not only behind steel helmets, but also under gas masks, to further cloak themselves in darkness.
특기대는 섹터와 끝없는 싸움을 벌여야 했으나 정작 피비린내 나는 잔인한 싸움은 특기대와 공안부 등 절대 권력 기관 안에서 벌어지기 시작했다.
Sorry, but I don't really have any interesting behind-the-scenes tales of Illang. What I have on Blu-ray was not subtitled into English, and I don't know what they're saying on it. And what I did find on YouTube is the standard electronic press kit stuff. Nothing that sheds any real light on the creative process, nothing truly interesting or candid. But fortunately, we have plenty from the production of Jin-Roh. The original plan for Jin-Roh was to do it as an OVA, with Mamoru Oshii and several other directors each doing an episode. And one of the people that was picked to direct an episode was Hiroyuki Okiura, who has worked with Oshii on many projects since Pat Labor. Oshii knew him as a skilled animator and knew that he wanted to direct. The problem was, Okiura wasn't sure he wanted to do something based on hellhounds.
オキューラにそれを話したところ、なんとなく嫌な顔をしたんですね。やりたくないのかなっていうことじゃなくて、どうもやるんだったら全部やりたいような顔をしてたので、やっぱりそういう男なのかなとは思いました。
それはあまりにもやっぱ押井さんのテイストが強い作品なんで、他の人がやるのは結構難しい作品だなと思ったんで。
Plans later changed, however, and Jin-Roh was to become a feature film. Oshii was busy with Ghost in the Shell, and Okiura was still attached to direct. Okiura still had his doubts about working in the Kaburo saga, but he did reach a compromise with Oshii. Okiura was fine with it being set in the Kaburo saga, but he didn't want it to be an adaptation of anything from the manga, Hellhounds Kaburo's Panzer Cops.
人がいっぺん作っちゃったものはやっぱり、もう一度焼き直してもあんまり、面白みもないですし、いいというのであれば考えますけどっていうことでいくつか。
でそれは何かというと、平たく言ってその男と女の話にしてくれと。今まで僕は漫画の世界とかでやってきたその原作にあるようなね話ではなくてオリジナルなストーリーで、それの線でその線でシナリオを書いてくれれば自分はやりますと。
Oshii accepted the condition quite readily, and when he settled on Little Red Riding Hood as a kind of backbone for the narrative, he wrote it fairly quickly. Both films opened to riots. By the way, Ilang's main action takes place in the year 2029, with Red Riding Hoods delivering satchel charges. The openings are very similar to that of the manga as well, only in the manga there are no Red Riding Hoods. Both of them feature a guy throwing a bomb at the cops, which eventually leads to the special unit confronting sect members in the sewer. As for the shootout itself, the one in Illang is long and flashy, whereas in Jin-Roh, it's short and brutal.
선제 공격에 대한 실탄 대응 사격을 실시한다.
In both films you have the protagonist, in Jin-Roh it's Fusei, and in Illang it's Lim, encountering the girl who blows herself up right in front of him. In Illang, the incident with the girl blowing herself up is enough to lead to a public outcry, leading to a 4-week suspension for the special unit, and calls for the special unit to be disbanded, with public security investigating them. In Jin-Roh, however, it's a little bit different. Both films prominently feature jurisdictional fights between the Capitol Police and public security, which was something that was also present in the manga as well. But in Jin-Roh, the problem wasn't so much that the girl blew herself up, it was rather because a bomb was allowed to go off at all. particularly because the special unit mobilized without any regard for the jurisdiction of public security, violating their co-policing agreement. Public security and other places are just looking for any excuse to shut down the special unit.
共同警備の申し合わせに対するなぜ事前に通告しておかなかった。
情報が漏れるのを承知でか。共同警備体制の推進なんて無駄はやめたらどうだ。所詮連中とは水と油合わせてみても濁って浮き上がるのは俺たちだけだ。
In both films, the officer who failed to shoot the girl, Fusei and Jin-Roh and Lim and Illang, are ordered for retraining, and each one is visited by a friend. Special unit dropouts, Han and Ilang and Henmi and Jin-Roh. Both give info on the girl that blew herself up. This eventually leads Lim and Fusei to each meet up with a woman who identifies as the girl's sister. In Jin-Roh, Fusei meets Kei Amamiya, the supposed sister of the girl, whose name is Nanami, at her grave. Whereas in Illang, Lim meets up with Lee Yoon-hee at a cafe. Oh, and before their first meeting in Illang, a scene of retraining takes place. Lim, like Fusei, freezes up during training and gets defeated by his instructor. Lim's instructor is named Jang Jin-tae, whereas in Jin-Roh it's Hachiro Tobe. The training sequence in Illang is edited like your standard action movie fare. Like the action in the rest of this movie, it's not bad, but nothing spectacular either, whereas Jin-Roh has tons of atmosphere. You see the men actually training in the protect gear, with the tale of Little Red Riding Hood playing in the background, accompanied by Hajime Mizoguchi's melancholic score.
정신 안 차릴 거야?
森の中で狼に出会い何を持っているのかと聞かれました。ミルクとパン、それにチーズとバターを少しと答えると、狼はピンの道と針の道のうちどちらから行くのかと聞き、ピンの道を行くと答えると、自分は針の道を急ぎ女の子の母親を食べてしまいました。
Anyway, back to the meetings. Both films have similar dialogue with the sister.
제가 원망스럽지 않습니까?
서로 입장이 달랐을 뿐이잖아요. 그쪽 잘못은 아니죠. 게다가 총도 쏘지 않았잖아요. 동생이 섹트에 들어간 뒤로 집이 풍비박산 났어요. 학교도 관두고 아빠는 쓰러지시고. 섹트, 거긴 개미 지옥 같은 데예요. 한번 들어가면 그냥 나오진 못해. 초면에 제가 별 얘기를 다 하네요. 요즘 제가 좀 그래요. 마음이 소금밭이라.
なぜ俺を責めない。
お互いにそういう立場だったのだから、あなたの責任じゃないわ。それにあなたは撃たなかったって話だし、悲しくないわけじゃないのよ。なんだかまだ実感が湧かないの。あの子はとっても純粋でまっすぐなところがあって、そのくせ強情で言うことを聞かないところもあって。
But in Illang, the first encounter with Yoon-hee turns into really a date. In fact, I think the cafe scene and the scene where they're eating noodles and such, as well as the following time in the bookstore, is meant to be a combination of three separate moments in Jin-Roh. Fusei and Kei meeting for the first time, their time at the amusement park, and the time where they walk around together in the city and riding trains, accompanied of course by beautiful music and recitation of Little Red Riding Hood, which of course helps them organically bond. In Illang, that doesn't quite happen. I have to say the music choices in this movie are kind of baffling to me. Apart from the movie's main score itself, which is rather unremarkable, during the date sequence they play Watermark by Enya. I was not expecting that. And I gotta confess, the first time I was watching this movie, I kind of snarkily said to myself, man, I miss Hajime Mizoguchi's score. Only for it to start playing when this movie recites Little Red Riding Hood in the bookstore. In Jin-Roh, Fusei is given a copy of Little Red Riding Hood by Kei, who claimed she was going to put it with Nanami's ashes. And that is the version that each recites in voiceover throughout the film. Sorry, getting back on track, I wasn't demanding that Mizoguchi's music be played in Illang. All I said to myself was I missed it. But when it plays here, not only does it feel like undeserved fan service, it doesn't work. Because as I'll explain a little bit later, this film doesn't commit to the fairy tale aspect of Jin-Roh, nor does it commit to the idea of dogs for that matter.
늑대는 소녀를 속여서 할머니 집으로 오게 했습니다. 소녀가 할머니 집에 도착했을 땐 할머니 이빨이 왜 이렇게 커다랗죠? 그래야 너를 잡아먹기 편하기 때문. 죽은 소년 누굴 탓해야 하죠? 굶주린 늑대 누굴 원망해야 할지 모른다는 게 제일 억울해.
Oh man, it's too soon for the characters to start doing this. We learned very quickly that this was of course a setup, to create a scandal in the special unit, to make it seem like the special unit and the sect are in cahoots. In Illang, Han in public security makes a deal with Yoon-hee for her cooperation, in exchange for commuted jail time and surgery for her little brother. Yeah, she has a little brother in this movie. She's being used by public security as she was once a Red Riding Hood. But in Jin-Roh, all that was needed to make Kei cooperate was her past, with the possible hope for survival as she has nothing else left. And she knows it.
全部嘘だった。あの子も妹なんかじゃないし、あなたに会ったのも偶然じゃない。赤ずきんのメンバーだったのよ。私も逮捕された後、首都警の公安部に連れてかれたわ。どうでもよくなってたのね。私、どうなろうと構わないと思って。言われるままに引き受けたわ。考えることに疲れちゃってて、何も考えないようにしようって自分に言い聞かせて。
In Illang, the main reason public security wants to get rid of the special unit because, as we'll find out later, public security is in cahoots with the sect. In Jin-Roh, in addition to creating a scandal, members of public security and higher-ups in the Capitol Police will merge the Capitol Police and public security with less focus on combat and more on counterintelligence. The caveat is, the special unit has to go. There's a scene similar to this in the manga where they plot exactly the same thing. In fact, one of the higher-ups in public security, Muromoto, tells Henmi what this merging of agencies is akin to.
一つの小屋に2匹の犬は入らん。2匹の犬のその血が必要なのだとしたら、つがいにすればことは済む。どちらの血筋が残るかは賭けだがな。いくら力を誇ろうと、その優れた血を残せなかった獣はいずれ滅びる。
And that getting rid of the special unit would be kind of like a new alpha doing away with some of the older cubs to make way for the new. However, in both Jin-Roh and Illang, the titular counter-organizations, Jin-Roh and Illang, which are often translated as Wolf Brigade, are aware of this conspiracy and each take steps to ensure their survival. Jin-Roh is a counterintelligence team that infiltrates other organizations to gather info and counteract their opponents. Illang seems to do the same thing, but they also assassinate other high-ranking officials? Okay. At most in Jin-Roh, they kill public security goons at the end, but that's all we see. I'm not saying they're above assassination, but the way they worked, assassination wasn't necessary. In Illang, the plan is to capture Lin and Yoon-hee at the observatory to do the scandal. In Jin-Roh, the plan is the same, but it takes place at a museum. But in Illang, they introduce something that doesn't pay off at all. Not really. They introduce a character named Kumi-kyung, who is one of Yoon-hee's comrades in the sect, who asks her where the leader is. Lim captures Kumi-kyung, and she is told by Jang Jin-tae that the sect leader is in cahoots with public security, gaining funds from them. He tells her that the prosecutor's office did an investigation into the funds, and while they were gathering evidence, Yoon-hee was seen with the leader of the sect. Yoon-hee was then captured by public security, and was coerced by them to kill the prosecutors, who were looking into their funds, and that is why she's being used by public security. Confused? Yeah, so am I. This film is going out of its way to make an already complex anime plot even more complicated. Kumi-kyung agrees to help.
근데 공안이 왜 그런 무리수를 두는 건데?
섹트가 이 혼란스러운 구조를 유지해 주니까 혼란을 가중시킨 뒤에 그 빌미로 주도권을 잡아 자신들의 플랜을 이루려는 거겠지. 엄철형이 찾아와. 이게 내 딜이다.
그럼 이제 내가 원하는 걸 말해 차례네?
In Jin-Roh, all that was needed was for Jin-Roh, the titular Wolf Brigade, to have K in their possession as proof that public security was working with SECT in any capacity. That was their ace, so that the special unit would be left alone. Whether she is alive or dead didn't matter to them in the long run, as long as public security couldn't confirm either. Anyway, after Kyumi Kyung goes to the observatory to tell Yoon-hee to look after herself, she disappears from the movie until the very, very end, and we'll get to that. Anyway, the operation is a bust, leading to a lengthy gun battle in an observatory, followed by a stunt that reminds me of a much better movie, drones, car chases, and Lim revealing to Han that he knows pretty much everything. In Jin-Roh, the sequence where Fusei goes to grab K is far more subdued. Yes, it's intense, but it's far more believable, and, well, far less stupid. Han searches the whole city for the duo, who are currently on their way to a safe house. Or rather, this old building will have to do since they couldn't make it to the safe house. However, Han did give Yoon-hee a tracking device, so if she felt that she was in danger, she can activate it, and they would be able to find her. Whereas in Jin-Roh, there was a tracking device planted on K, but she never knew about it. But Tobe knew where to find it.
俺が奴らの立場でも保険はかけるさ。もっとも、この手を偏見に教えたのは俺なんだがな。
Okay, I gotta talk about something pretty big. Illang not committing to the fairy tale aspect of Jin-Roh, despite doing the tale at the bookshop and doing all the wolf talk and imagery and other crap, is probably the biggest thing that sinks this movie, apart from the ending, which I'll get to later. Fusei in Jin-Roh essentially belongs to a pack, the Wolf Brigade. And whenever the fairy tale of Little Red Riding Hood is being recited, it not only tells you how the story is gonna end, but it also serves as a way to show us that the walls are closing in on Fusei and K. K because she is a pawn in both public security and the special unit's plans. And the fact that Fusei is a wolf stuck between wanting to live as a human or staying with his pack. This conflict within him really began when he saw Nanami blow herself up right in front of him. Now he's stuck between staying in a place that he pretty much calls his home or leaving all that behind for something he feels he can't belong in.
なぜ撃たなかった？わかりません。
ここにこうしてると、私もいつかきっとこの街を抜け出せるんじゃないかって思うの。どこか遠くの知らない街で別の人間になっちゃうのよ。あなたはなぜ特機隊に入ったの？
やっと見つけた居場所だったのかもしれない。
大切な場所？
多分ね。
あなたは来られないわ。
待ってくれ！聞きたいことがあるんだ！
あなたは来られないわ。来てはいけないの。
おい！やめろ
There was talk in the manga of stray dogs, drawn to the scent of other dogs, as was a lone wolf sort of character in the first issue of the manga, who was kind of abandoned by his previous masters and was looking for a new one in the Capitol Police. As I see it, Fusei may have been that kind of character once upon a time. But unlike the lone wolf character, Toru Inui, in the first issue of the comic book who dies from his own stupidity, Fusei is accepted, but has yearnings to be a man, even if he briefly thinks about running away with Kei.
このまま。いや、なんでもないよ。
このまま二人でどこか遠くへ行っちゃおっか。誰も知らないところまで逃げちゃうのよ。ね？そうしよう。ね？
それは無理だよ。まだやらなければならないことがある。
でもこのままじゃ二人とも。
すまない。
Fusei is the wolf in this tale, and he knows it, and sadly he will have to eat Little Red Riding Hood. They can't escape from their respective fates, and it hurts Fusei. And just based on what I see in the film, I think there may have been something deep down in Fusei that wished Kei wasn't part of the sect. as he really was starting to grow close to her. But unfortunately, upon seeing the evidence,
女の子が着物を脱いで寝台に近づくと、母さんは布巾を顔の方までかぶって奇妙な格好をして寝ていました。母さん、なんて大きな耳をしてるの。母さん、なんて大きな目をしてるの。これでなければお前がよく見えやしないからさ。母さん、なんて大きな爪なの。母さん、なんて大きな歯をしてるの。
Illang really has none of those conflicts. The most it has is Lim just not wanting to kill Yoon-hee because he likes her. There's no inner conflict for him to struggle with. At least nothing very substantial. At the end of the film, he expresses his regrets and disappointment with Bloody Friday, and also his boss who gave the order. The whole thing with Bloody Friday and its tenuous link to the Little Red Riding Hood tale is the closest thing we get to a solid idea of wolves in this film. Oh, by the way, when I first saw this movie, I honestly forgot Bloody Friday was a thing the second after the intro to the film. It never came up in my mind until they brought it up at the end of the film. I showed some clips earlier of Fusei very briefly proposing the idea of running away together with Kei, but in Illang, it's Yoon-hee that proposes the idea. But because the way it's done here is so over-the-top melodramatic with the music fully backing it up, I actually started chuckling at this scene.
나 사실 섹트 들어간 거 집안이 그렇게 돼버리면 어떻게든 살아야겠단 마음으로 들어가. 상우가 다치지 않을 거라고. 난 그날만 믿어서 이렇게 커질 줄 몰랐어. 내가 터뜨릴 거야. 나 그놈들이 나한테 한 거 고문당한 거 그거 내가 다 증명할 수 있어. 같이 떠나면 우리 살 수 있어요, 준경 씨. 떠나요. 네, 같이 떠나요. 난 다 버렸어.
Yeah, when I stated earlier it was too soon for them to kiss here in Illang, it was because they never really bonded. Now you could say that Yoon-hee was just using Lim and such, but she states in the safe house,
담산에서 준경 씨 처음 본 날 그날 나 마음속으로 빌었어요. 나랑 죽은 여자애랑 내 동생이랑 그리고 자기 저 남자도 구해달라고. 참으로 한 마음속 기도니까 들어주시겠죠.
But unlike in Jin-Roh, the movie doesn't give enough time for them to bond for this to work. Whereas it works here in Jin-Roh because it's developed. And they know that this is the last time that they will be able to give any kind of comfort to each other.
寒いね。
They leave the abandoned building in Illang and the amusement park in Jin-Roh to go to the sewer to confront public security. And they are both lured there due to the respective tracking devices. In Jin-Roh, we especially see Tobei's hold on Fusei. Tobei knows that Fusei will obey. In fact, earlier in the film, when Lieutenant Commander Honda is looking over the evidence of the talk in the junkyard with the conspirators, he talks to Tobei about Fusei's involvement.
そろそろ動き出しそうだな。奴は本当に使えるのか。
獣として生きるしかない男でしょうから。
So when Tobei is telling Kei all of this, it actually has weight.
もう分かったろ。ここにいる男は特機隊の隊員であるとともに常に我々の組織のメンバーだ。成功で私の指導を受けていた生徒だった頃から。
そうなの？
あれが本当の彼の姿。我々は犬の皮をかぶった人間じゃない。人の皮をかぶった狼なのさ。
人？狼
Even Kei's cries to him are worthless in this moment. Tobei's hold on Fusei is pretty much absolute. Tobei is the master, and Fusei is the dog who knows who his master is.
仕方ないじゃない！どうしようもなかったのよ！一緒に行きたかったけど、あなたは行くことのできない人だったんだもの！せめて一緒に死んでしまえば、そうすれば、お互いの心に、あなたの心に、私がとどまっていられる。誰かに覚えていてもらいたかった。
Illang does something similar, but it's in this movie because it was in the anime, not because it works. Getting some serious Ghost in the Shell 2017 flashbacks.
일랑이라고 들어봤나? 임준경은 일랑이다. 우린 늑대의 탈을 쓴 인간이 아니라 인간의 탈을 쓴 늑대야.
아니야. 그럴 리 없어.
Illang has a long, drawn-out Hollywoody shootout between the special unit and public security, with Lim getting a very serious injury. Yeah, this one, right here, that he just seems to shake off. At least, he should be limping or dragging his leg all over the place. Not doing this. Or any of this. And Lim just successfully takes them all out, including Han. Whereas Jin-Roh's end is, again, appropriately short and brutal. It shows Fusei abandoning his humanity and fully embracing being a wolf, taking out all the public security goons, including Henmi.
お前だって人間じゃねえか！せー！
In Illang, Lim just goes ahead and takes out public security because... Now let's talk about the ending to Jin-Roh. The Wolf Brigade having K in their hands to keep public security off their backs is working in their favor. But to keep it so they can never get her back and can't confirm whether she's dead or alive, she has to die. And it's appropriate that it's being done in the junkyard, where the conspiracy was started in the first place. It will begin there and die there. Tobei then makes Fusei deliver the final shot, and he knows he will do it. But still, a sniper is put in place if Fusei doesn't do it, to take out both him and K.
群れを離れて人のもとへ行きたくなったが、人の皮をかぶって人と隣り合わせに生きていても、狼が人になれるわけじゃない。自分の手で運んだ爆弾で多くの命を奪ったあの女の罪が決して消えないようにな。人と関わりを持った獣の物語に結末をつけろ。お前が獣でいられる間に。
母さん、なんて大きな目をしてるの？母さん、なんて大きな爪なの？母さん、なんて大きな歯をしてるの？
そして狼は赤ずきんを食べた。
And that is the end right there. It's tragic, but very beautiful. Now let's talk about the ending to Illang. They take Yoon-hee to an old training ground to execute her, but Lim shows up to plead her case. Oh, and this is after a montage where they play more music from Jin-Roh. And no, it doesn't work here either. Lim's boss then orders him to kill her. And what we'll see is a really impotent measure to exercise control over him, because he doesn't have any. And of course they do the whole thing from the anime where she recites parts of Little Red Riding Hood.
공안을 끌어들이고자 하는 목적은 이미 달성했고 우린 저 여자를 충분히 이용했습니다.
하지만 이윤이는 테러리스트고 그것만으로도 사형감이야.
저 여자가 테러리스트로 태어난 것도 아니지 않습니까?
정신 차려 임준경. 네가 차려. 그래야 저 여자가 이 세상에 미련을 두지 않는다. 이 상황이 부당한 건지 정당한 건지 네가 판단해.
늑대는 소녀를 속여서 할머니 집으로 오게 했죠. 소녀가 할머니 집에 도착했을 땐 먼저 온 늑대가 이미 할머니를 잡아먹고 난 뒤였어요. 할머니 손이 왜 그래요? 네 손을 잘 잡기 위해서란다. 할머니 네 이야기를 잘 듣기 위해서지. 할머니 그런데 왜
Yeah. Now this is where it gets really stupid. Lim lets her go, and his boss, for some reason, calls off the sniper to go confront Lim himself. And after an unnecessary, uninvolving fight scene, the two characters talk about Bloody Friday and all that jazz.
과천 사태 이후로 많은 생각을 했다. 내가 내리는 명령이 부당한 건지 생각하고 또 생각했어.
그 아이들은 무기도 없었고 적도 아니었습니다. 그리고 지금 저 여자도 마찬가지입니다.
분명히 잘못된 정보가 있었고 작전 중에 일어날 수 있는 실수다.
난 여지껏 당신의 명령에 따라왔고 조직의 명령대로 살았습니다. 이젠 제 생각대로 살겠습니다.
Then Lim just decides to walk away. A shot is rung out and you would think that his boss killed him, but no, he's alive and he sees Yun-hee and her brother get on a train to leave the city. Lim is somehow just able to walk away from a very secret counterintelligence group. We go to Kyung, who gets paid for, I guess, finding the sect leader and helping public security get indicted for helping fund the sect? What? And the special unit just carries on what it does like it were just a normal day. No, I'm sorry. Lim would not leave alive after failing to follow orders. Fusei and Jin-Roh would never have left alive if he failed to kill Kei. They could not have a disobedient dog running around. He would be of no use to anyone. Also, they could easily track down and kill Yun-hee as she knew far too much about public security and the special unit. And I'm not even sure if Kyung would walk out of there alive as well. Even she knew a lot. Look, I may not be an expert on dirty government dealings or conspiracies, but I am positive that many bodies would pile up to keep all secrets, well, a secret. God, this ending sucks! It's akin to the Love Conquers All studio edit of Brazil, and to insult me and the audience further, the track Grace from Jin-Roh plays at the end credits, where, again, it doesn't fit. Illang is a pretty lousy film. I have ragged on it for various reasons, but arguably the biggest one is forsaking the fairy tale aspect of Jin-Roh in favor of generic Hollywood fluff. It doesn't even really try to do something unique on its own. Well, unless you count generic Hollywood fluff unique. They couldn't even try to do something a little bit different, a different kind of fairy tale in order to tell a really cool Cabero Saga story, but in live action, and in South Korea. But no, Illang uses the imagery and name recognition of Jin-Roh in service of making something that's not only simple-minded, yet overly complicated and overplotted. It looks, feels, and ends up like a ton of other Western action films, be they theatrical or direct-to-disc, or even direct-to-streaming. And thus it becomes really a chore to sit through. Could this film have worked with a touch more upbeat ending? I don't know, but as it stands, the ending feels like the filmmakers cheated just so they can have an ending that differs from the anime. For me, having too many nostalgic callbacks feels less like the filmmakers want to create something cool and more like they're just out of ideas. And they often resort to nostalgia because the new ones they do come up with flat out don't work. I don't know, it just seems to me that this movie was a bad idea. Just changing the settings and the circumstances isn't enough to give it its own unique flavor. At worst, Illang is a very bad movie. At best, it's a forgettable one. A very forgettable one. Let me ask you guys a question. For those of you who saw Jin-Roh the first time, what did you think of it? My reaction was one of indifference at first, but it stuck with me. So much so that I gave it a second viewing, and a third, and a fourth, and so on. And I saw more and more in the film with each viewing. And of course, I loved it more and more. It's a story that envelops you in a, well, gorgeously bleak fairy tale atmosphere, even if it is set in an alternate 20th century. It's a complex story, and yet it's simple in its complexity, if that makes sense. And in its austerity, there is still powerful drama and emotion, and it delivers it fully in roughly about 30 less minutes than Illang.
こういうどちらかといえば非常にオーソドックスな非常にシンプルなドラマで、ただディテールっていうものを大事にして丹念に描いていく。どちらかといえば非常に日本映画が最も得意としていた世界ですよ。それをアニメーションでなぜやらなきゃならないのか。逆に今そういうことをやろうと思うとアニメーションでなければできないんだってことをね。でこういう作品を作らせてもらえたことに関して言えば非常に感謝してるし、制作会社は大きな決断をしたっていうか英断だと思ってます。
The look of the film also lends to its fairy tale atmosphere, where every frame looks like a faded photograph or old newsreel footage. I'm not completely sure if I can call this a true otaku classic, but it may be kind of a cult one that seems to be getting more and more attention as time goes on. It's a film so good that it even exceeded Mamoru Oshii's expectations, so much so that he wished he directed it himself. So yeah, if something like Jin-Roh is up your alley, seek it out. It earns my highest recommendation.